Yo guys, what is up? Max here in a Borderlands 3 video, and today we're talking about a brand new melee build that is genuinely the most excited I've been to share a build with you guys in a long time. This build destroys my M10 true takedown, which is wild, and there's so much to talk about, guys. Before we get into the video, real quick, two things. One, we are so close to 100k subscribers, and we're doing a giveaway for the next 1,000 subscribers. Right now, there's about 500 spots left, so if you hit that subscribe button during the course of this video, you'll be entered to win a code for DLC 3. Lastly, I dropped some merch. I'm really happy with how it came out. I think it looks really cool. Sorry for the plug, guys, but if you want to support me and get some cool clothing, it's pretty dope. Alright, with that, let's get into the video. Alright, so showing on your screen is the new skill tree for this build, and we're going to run through all of the gear real quick, and then we'll deep dive into the skill tree because the gear is important to this build, and it is very specific to have this build operate as well as it does. Now, the first piece of gear that you're using, and pretty much the only weapon that you need, is a COV pistol with 120 melee damage with 390 anoint. Now, it doesn't need to be the Linoge, it can be any pistol, as long as it's got the 120 melee damage, which is the highest melee damage it can roll on a weapon, and the 390 is what you're going to be aiming for. The next thing that we're going for is a Brawler's Ward. Now, I'm using a 300 melee damage Brawler's Ward with bonus rad. Unfortunately, this was the only one that I still had lying around, so radiation is what I'm going for, but any different ASE element on this would be fine. The reason we are using a level 1 Brawler's Ward is because it'll have such low shield. The fact that it is such low shield means that it gets depleted very easily. We don't lose any damage on the melee, but our shield gets depleted and it stays depleted, which is important because we're always going to have the 300% melee damage. If you want to know how to get a level 1 shield, it's really easy. You can do it on any platform. Basically, just have the Brawler's Ward drop from you from Graveward. Don't pick it up. Save and quit. Join your friend's game as a new level 1 character. Go to the Lost and Found, and you can pull out the Lost and Found and get all your items as level 1. So that is a quick way to get the Brawler's Ward. Next up, we are using the Breaker. Now, the Breaker, the most important thing about this that you're going to be looking for is +1 into Find Your Center and as many points as you possibly can get into Jab Cross. Now, I will explain why Jab Cross is so important to this build, but Find Your Center with a +1 into the Breaker is going to give you +200% melee damage, which is awesome, and is the reason we are using the Breaker class mod. Now, the next thing that we're using is the Unleash the Dragon legendary artifact, which can be found from El Dragon in Jacob's Estate. Now, this is going to give us a lot of our damage because it's going to give us a dot that is triggered when we melee an enemy. This dot scales on how hard we hit an enemy, and before we get into all the crazy mechanics, I just wanted to run through, and then the grenade, it could be anything. Ideally, you'd be using a It's Piss with a different ASE element. I just had the Hunter Seeker on right now because I don't have an It's Piss, but It's Piss ideally is the best thing that you could be using. If you want to use a Fish Slap, you totally can, but I wanted to make this a true melee build. I didn't want to use the Fish Slap, I didn't want to rely on it, and I will talk about the Face Puncher, but this build doesn't use the Face Puncher. You don't need to use it, but the Face Puncher is really strong. Now, let's talk about these interactions that make this build so strong. Now, the first thing that you guys need to understand is that the 390 anoint scales our melee damage. So, when you melee an enemy that has full health, you are going to get 300 bonus damage on that melee hit. 390 was nerfed, and enemies have a lot less, but for a melee build, a lot of the times you're going to be approaching an enemy at full health, a lot of the times, and you will be able to one-punch them, and you will be activating your 399 always, so that is why, number one reason we are using 390. The next reason is because of we're using Ties That Bind. Now, Ties That Bind is going to link damage between enemies, But most importantly, the damage that is linked between enemies counts as action skill damage. You are going to be scaling your action skill damage with a few different things, but the 390 anoint when an enemy is full health, linked to an enemy is full health. When you punch one enemy, the ties that bind damage will then get amplified by 300% if you are using the 390 anoint. That is why we can hit for such crazy, ridiculous numbers, and that is why you can one-shot any enemy in the game with this build if they are bound with ties that bind. Now, we are not using Slayer here. I just wanted to clarify that. I'm using Speed Demon. You do not need Slayer. If you want to use Slayer, totally can. I personally wouldn't, because I like the speed. Now, the next thing that we need to talk about is scaling of the Unleash the Dragon and the Groundbreaker new modifier. Also, in your Guardian rank, you're going to want to disable Shield Reboot. Killing an enemy triggers Shield Regeneration. You don't want this. You want your Brawler's Ward to stay down, and you do not want your Shield Recharge rate and delay improved, so turn that off as well. Now, Groundbreaker is very cool because melee attacks or slams will trigger an Aftershock, dealing 25% of all non-melee damage you've dealt over the last 5 seconds. Now, this does not allow you to chain melee damage, but there are some damage sources that we can do that do not count as melee, that then allow us to always have buffs to our melee damage. One of those things is going to be killing enemies with ties that bind, and the other is going to be proccing dots with Unleash the Dragon. This Unleash the Dragon dot will average around 8 million damage per tick, so you're going to be doing all this melee damage. If you don't one-shot an enemy, your melee tick damage will kill them very quickly, and then you're going to be able to chain that between enemies, and this allows you to hit very, 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 very hard. Now, the next thing that I need to talk about with ties that bind and that link damage is ties that bind is going to get more damage the more action skill damage that we have. So ties that bind, it was not nerfed. Some people were like, it's nerfed. I promise you guys it's not nerfed. We're using Jab Cross to give us action skill damage plus 105%. I've got 2 on this. And we're using Do Harm, which is going to give us action skill damage, and with the 390 anoint, genuinely you can one-shot anything with this build if they're ties that bind, and then you melee them. It is crazy. Now, let's get into these skills. Because they're a little weird. One, personal space doesn't benefit your melee. It doesn't do anything for you, so we're not speccing into it. We're going Root to Rise and Clarity for a ton of health. It's important to have a ton of health and be very tanky. Next, we're going Helping Hands for that damage reduction. Find Your Center for melee damage, melee range, and Mindfulness. Mindfulness is not needed here, but the movement speed is nice, and you're going to be getting hit, so it's nice to be able to scamper along and be very quick with it. I just put 1 point into 1 with nature. Good thing to note is Samsara doesn't work with ties that bind, so it's absolutely useless here, so do not spec it. And mainly, we're going Jab Cross for the action skill damage. When we hit an enemy with ties that bind, we will be able to absolutely destroy them. The only thing is we're not using like a Phaserker, so our action skill damage is hard. We have less cooldown, so that's why we went to Restless for 5 cooldown. We're getting Blitz for the melee damage. You're going to be able to reset melee override Blitz, which you'll be able to do on most enemies in the game. Most enemies you can one-punch. The only enemies that you can't is going to be like enemies in the Guardian Takedown and bosses. And we're going Guardian Angel. You do not need Guardian Angel, but it's nice to have. There's a chance you could go down. You are playing a melee build, so why not? We're going Do Harm for the action skill damage. Once again, I explained with ties. Soul Sap for the lifesteal. We're going to do a unbelievable amount of damage when we hit enemies with ties that bind. So Soul Sap will actually full heal us every time. We do not need Ascendant. We do not need more Soul Sap lifesteal. So putting those 5 points into Restless. Then we get to our red tree. Anima is going to increase our status effect damage and duration. Not the best thing for this build, but it is very, very nice. So status effect, because we're doing melee, we can inflict melee status effects. Anima actually works out pretty nicely. Tempest for boosting all of our elemental damage. Illuminated Fist is going to convert our melee damage and also give us bonus melee damage. Super awesome. Wildfire is great because, so the reason that I'm not speccing Violent Tapestry, while I know that it is a way to build up stacks, and if you wanted to, you could take 1 point on Restless and put it into Violent Tapestry. This is a melee ignite chance of 100%. This always ignites, so I don't really need more ignite chance, and Wildfire will help spread our dot when we do. Dot. Deep Well for magazine size, this is not needed. Dread's not really needed. There's not that many points that you could really justify using here, besides just putting points down to get to sustainment, which is going to allow us to lifesteal off of our melee. So we're kind of just wasting points to get down to sustainment. If you have a better use for them, you could put them anywhere, but there's nothing else really that we need besides sustainment so that we can now stay alive a lot better. Now the playstyle of this build is you're going to want to be meleeing everything while you're on cooldown. As soon as your action skill is up, grasp a big group and one-shot them. And one thing to be wary of is your ASCs don't matter that much, but they are important. So you could have gone 100 melee on this Brawler's Ward, for example, instead of radiation damage. The one thing that's important to keep in mind is that your ASCs are going to be boosting, giving your elemental damage to melees, and it also procs on Groundbreaker. So your ASCs are going to give whatever you hit with Groundbreaker, your ASCs will have 50% of that element, 50% of a different element. So in testing, the ASC elemental damage is going to be better than your ASC melee damage, and that is why I went ASC elemental. If you do not have ASC elemental, you can go ASC melee, but honestly, both work pretty well. And that's about it for the build, guys. Make sure that you disable your Guardian Rig. I'm using Roguelite. You do not... If I was picking my modifiers, to be honest, I would go for the Not in the Face, which is minus 75% crit, because we're not going to be critting, and Speed Demon. It doesn't really matter for your other modifiers. Right now, I have Roguelite on, which doesn't really matter, because you don't really die with this build. You're really freaking tanky, and you do so much damage that things have a very, very difficult time actually killing you. So I haven't really noticed using Roguelite, but I would probably recommend going the minus 75% crit. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something new. While these pieces of gear can be a little bit more difficult to get, once you get them, this build performs extremely well. If you want to use the Face Puncher, if you want to use the Fish Slap, go ahead. It's only going to make this build stronger. The Face Puncher can multi-proc Ground Slam, and things can get truly, truly crazy. But I wanted to make a true to form, run around and punch things build, which is what we have achieved here, without requiring any luck from White Elephants, without requiring any luck from other things. If you want to use a White Elephant, like I used in the Grave Ward clip, you totally can. Your White Elephant, I would go Knife Drain, and that's going to give you the most amount of damage potential is using a White Elephant, because your White Elephant will scale off of your melee, but it really isn't necessary, except for if you're like really, really trying to hit for like 400 million without Ties That Bind is the hardest I've hit with this melee and White Elephant. So that's just 400 million just punching something without doing any action skill crazy stuff. It's truly wild. Guys, sorry for taking so long. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace!